invention. It's priority.
The only way to do great work is to love what you do.
Live life as though everything is rigged in your favor.
Ignore the noise. Have faith in yourself. Recognize that you are an entrepreneur.
From the campus of the University of Maryland's Robert H. Smith School of Business, the Dingman Center for Entrepreneurship presents Bootstrapped.
Welcome to Bootstrapped, a Dingman Center podcast. I'm Ilana Fine.
And I'm Joe Bailey.
And each episode of Bootstrap features a funder or founder from the University of Maryland and Dingman Center community. Today we are thrilled to have Scott Nash, founder and owner of Mom's Organic Market, and Joe's favorite birthday spot, Vuk Pinball in Bethesda.
In Bethesda, yes.
Here in studio today. Scott, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So Mom's Organic Market is a perfect story of bootstrapping. Can you talk to us through the start of the company?
Yes. It was very slow out of the gates. Bought my sister's Malibu wagon to make deliveries in the middle of the night. Opened out of my mother's garage. It took 9 years for us to get to $1 million in annual revenues.
What was that opportunity you saw early on?
Well, opportunity. As an entrepreneur, I was never a good student. I didn't like to read. I wasn't a good reader. I didn't like to read things that was not interesting to me. And I was a bad employee. So I was kind of lost. And I always had this chip on my shoulders that I could do it better than my bosses for all the jobs that I had. And of course, every boss I had was a, quote, idiot.
Now, did you work at grocery stores? Were those your summer jobs?
So I was kind of a lost soul, and I feel like entrepreneurialism kind of rescued me. And so I did work at this place. I actually tried to launch an omelet catering company. And it didn't work, but in the meantime, I took a job at this place called Organic Farms in Beltsville, and I got into organic foods, and one thing led to another.
And so you mentioned that you started the business from your mom's garage. Is that where the name originated?
Not really. Other people think that, obviously. Okay. Yeah. No, it was just I actually wanted to name it. I had this great dog. Her name was Mitzi, okay. And I wanted to name it Mitzi's Organic Market. And I think a guy tried to talk me out of that, one of my first employees, and we named it Mom's.
Yeah, this is one of those sliding doors type things where we have to picture what Mitzi's have.
That's right.
I think 15 stores now, almost 900 customers, something like that, or over 900 employees. Mitzi's.
Mom's is great because it's. My mother did have a big role. She did come in and help me. She's kind of a clean freak, so she would come in and always say the place was too dirty. And she lent me $2,000 to set up shop in her garage. I paid her back, but then a year later I had to move, and she lent me $3,000 to move to a place. But more importantly, she taught me how to prepare and store produce. I had no idea. I was just taking it out of the box and putting it up on the shelf. But she says, no, it needs prepping. It needs to be hydrated. It needs to be stored a certain way. And to this day, our produce is better than anybody's because my mom taught me how to prep and store produce.
And so you had said that you always had this chip on your shoulder. You thought you could do things a better way. How did that lead to a career in the grocery business?
I think that a main trait of an entrepreneur is that we reject authority and we challenge conventional wisdom. I think it is that we are looking for problems that need solutions or just better things that don't exist. Yes, I worked for a lot of people, hourly jobs, and I always kind of was disgruntled because I always thought my boss either didn't know what he was doing or that things could be done better. So I was just kind of like a negative kid who, thought I could do better things.
And so what did you do better early on that stays with you and the company to this day?
early on? Well, it was the service and it was the produce, the quality of the produce. And, you know, I just read a book recently, The Surrender Experiment, about an entrepreneur. And he summed it up really well. He said that he really liked to help people. And so I feel like I was always so helpful and looking for ways to make the customer happy. And I think a lot of businesses don't do that, especially retail. They're more like, what's going to make my job easier? Yeah, it was just trying to please people, really.
But you also have to source the product. You said you had linkages with some of the organic farmers that were in the area. What kind of partnerships or relationships did you have early on that gave you access to produce that, let's say, some of the bigger stores did not have?
Well, when I say organic farms, that was the name of the company. It wasn't literally farms. But I will say, though, that it's not who you know, it's who you know who likes you. And so it was really important.
I need to think about that.
You know, so it was really important that, you know, I had a good demeanor, that I was fair-minded, you know, that I wasn't too greedy, that there was a reasonable and fairness there, and just a default kind of happy demeanor. I was young.
And so you're a service company, you're doing a delivery service. At what point did you then decide that there was enough demand to have a brick and mortar store?
It was less that, more I hated doing, it was a by any means possible, necessary way of surviving. Because like I said, it took 9 years to get to $1 million in revenues. My credit cards were maxed out. It was always, every 2 years, I felt like I was going to fold.
And this is just you with the business. You hadn't taken on any partners at this time.
And I still don't have partners. But yeah, just me. But it was... and
just for people listening, you're talking about $1 million in revenue in the grocery industry that has relatively low margins typically. So I can understand why you're trying to figure out then how do you, I imagine, increase top line, but also margins as well. Yeah,
I mean, I was making $50,000 a year.
Which is a lot of work for $50,000, I imagine.
But the delivery, and I also eventually did mail order, those were just stepping stones, ways to getting me to where I wanted to be, which is retail. And I feel like I'm retired today working retail. Most people say retail is tough. I love it. Like they come and get their own stuff. They pay you right away. You know, you don't have to take an order. And when I started, I had carbon paper and adding machines. You know, so it was really hard.
Right. Just for our listeners, I don't know if it was 1987 when you started. Okay.
Yeah. No internet yet. You know.
And what kind of pain points did you have at that time?
Well, I'm lucky to be in an industry that has grown a lot I wonder how much credit I deserve for having grown Moms to where it is, because it's not like we were in the paperclip industry, and so it was mostly keeping up with business, and the pain points there. I think that a good quote I've heard is that business would be great if it just weren't for the employees and customers. So it's almost always the people.
But you're still you're curating or buying kind of wholesale produce, and I've got to imagine that that's something that you know really well. So you've got an eye, you know what's going to work and what's not going to work. I mean, there's got to be some secret sauce in what you were doing.
I once read, and I won't forget it, and maybe it was like Washingtonian magazine or something, but I just remember reading somewhere that 90% of people surveyed said that the number one reason they shopped at their grocery store was the quality of the produce. So I always focused on the quality of the produce. I made sure it was just spectacular, and it still is to this day.
And so talk to us about your growth from when you opened the first store.
So the first retail store was in 1990, and it really was Monday and Tuesday I did mail order, to give UPS enough time to get the products to people's doors before Friday. And then on Wednesday and Thursday I did home delivery, and then I opened to the public on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I did that praying that one day I'd have enough retail where I could get rid of home delivery and mail order, and that's what happened.
And so how did you decide when it was ready to open more stores and pick the locations?
Yeah. So I opened, my first check was July 2nd, 1987, and my second store opened in 2000, and that was in College Park. I was nervous. I didn't know if I could be in two places at once. And so I did a real conservative store in College Park at $9 a foot and 5,000 square feet, so not a lot of downside. And it worked. And then I opened another store, the third store in 2002 in Alexandria. That's aggressive growth because you're growing 50% going from 2 stores to 3 stores in a year. Alexandria was terrible, and it almost put me out of business. So I had to stop. So this has always been a test, a push, a pullback, a circling of the wagons, learn as I go type journey.
I mean, as you're opening these stores, are you basically, do you have a blueprint that you're following, or is it a little bit ad hoc?
It's ad hoc. It's
Is
a lot.
that right?
It's a lot of bit ad hoc. I mean, there are, I'm not a big believer in consultants and experts and things, and there are a lot of like surveying, demographic surveys that get done. People hire experts. I mean, Ray Kroc flew around and looked for the churches. You know what I mean? And so, we look at density, education, a minimum income. People say you have to come to this area because it's wealthy. It's like, well, I don't care how much you're worth. You can only eat so much.
Right.
So we really need people and then a minimum incomes. And it's a test. Every store we open, we don't know what it's going to do. That's why everybody closes stores. We have not yet, but we've made a couple. Well, really one. We've stubbed our toe once, but it's not slow enough that we were going to close it. So there's no science to it. There is a lot of gut.
And you had mentioned, you said, the market, the growth of the organic market has, helped your business. And looking back in 1987, we weren't all, talking about organic as much as we have now. Can you talk about how that has increased the diversity of your products? Because you're selling a lot more than produce now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, there was, when I got into business, there was one kind of spaghetti sauce that was organic, one. It was from Walnut Acres, a small family-operated place in Pennsylvania. It came in a can. It had a very generic label, and it said "with meat." And of course, back then everybody was a vegetarian, in our industry. So the industry has boomed. I mean, I could do 40 feet of organic spaghetti sauce now. So it's grown, and I'll never forget. I think it was 2001 or 2. I was watching TV in my basement. I almost fell out of my chair. I saw an ad for organic Rice Krispies. And I knew the organic industry had arrived, But that was 15 years after I opened. But really, it has grown so much and so quickly. And frankly, I have to tip my hat to Whole Foods for being responsible for a lot of that growth.
So, yes, the market is growing, but, I mean, come on, Scott, there's got to be things that you're going to do. You mentioned Whole Foods. They're clearly in a growth strategy as well, and there's customers who like them, but you have a loyal following of customers. How do you keep that when a Whole Foods is looming out there?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, our best stores actually are in the shadows of Whole Foods, so we compete with them. We coexist with them, let's say, rather comfortably. I have a few roles at my company, and probably the most important one is the brand. There's a lot of power to focus on messaging. Let's look at the White House actually right now for Exhibit A with that. We don't deviate from our message. We don't care if customers come in and think we're weird or they feel uncomfortable. We don't care if employees come in and feel weird and uncomfortable. Like, I actually gave a speech. Spoke to some new employees today about that. Like if you don't feel comfortable, you should take note and cut your losses here.
Kind of like a keep Austin weird kind of.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So we do things that really we have a strong culture. I think we have one of the most powerful brands in the country. It's not as big as some, but I think we're good at branding.
So you just you gave me a softball to now give you a softball, because one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was culture. And when I started to talk to some folks to let them know we were interviewing you, that was what came up number one. It was about mom's culture for the customers as well as the employees. Can you talk a little bit about that and how the culture has evolved over time?
Yeah. Well, that's another thing I'm in charge of. And culture kind of is a subset of our brand. Culture, I mean, it's a tribe. And I think there's a book called Tribes out there by Seth Godin. Yeah. And that's there are tribes throughout the world because we're humans and we like to belong. I'd say the Grateful Dead, or I'm a Rush fan. We're tribes, and so, and that's what Moms is. We've formed such a strong culture, and I feel like the values. I alluded to this. The values and the culture act the role of like an immunity system to like eject the virus. Yeah. And so to build that. We do really unique things that speak to the people that we want to speak to. Again, we focus on the messaging and the worldview of our customers and our employees. And there is, it's a psychographic, I think they call it. Like, I think we're very tuned into that.
Yeah, give us an example of some of the things you do to help set the tone or the culture of your organization.
Well, like, when employees come in, we have a green benefit where we give them like subsidies for like electric lawnmowers, electric cars, clotheslines to hang their clothes with. And then for customers, we do a lot of environmental initiatives. For example, we'll do things like we banned bottled water. And coincidentally, that's Whole Foods' #1 selling grocery item, and we took that out to make a statement. It's kind of like
just
when...
move that out of the way. You
yeah,
don't have to
I
see
know.
It. Do not look at the bottled water behind the curtain.
Well,
it was just in case you were thirsty.
and other, there are CEOs who are great at that. Like, look at Howard Schultz, who shut down Starbucks to, quote, retrain his baristas. I mean, that was a very strong brand play in building the culture of high quality coffee. So, we do things that we sell. We have like a magazine display that this is the culture of the customers where, it's mindfulness. Matter of fact, our values are all mindfulness rooted. Let go of ego, find your purpose, find your gratitude, accept the things you cannot change and change the things you can. These are the things that we focus on to create that. Matter of fact, the city paper just had a newspaper article written on us. The title was, "Is Moms Really a Cult?" Huh. And I'll leave it up to the...
You said you like Rush, not Grateful Dead, so we'll say no.
Well, just as a quick funny story, one of the some of our community, Glenn Hellman, Mr. Cranky, who I saw last night before recording, mentioned we were bringing you in, and he mentioned that his brother actually had a very successful exit from a company, didn't really need to work, but either currently or at one point was stocking shelves for you because he loved working at Mom's Organic so much. So just a shout out to Glenn Hellman's brother.
If he was here, I'd give him a big hug. That's beautiful.
So the culture is something that we talk a lot about in business school, and you've built it, you've sustained it, you've grown, you've kept that culture intact. Can I ask any missteps?
With culture, not really. I mean, I think, I'll tell you one. It takes courage to have culture. You can't be all things to all people. And I guess to go back to the branding of politics, you look at Trump and Clinton, she was playing not to lose. And she was playing not to offend anybody and to not make ripples, whereas Trump just went no bars held, whatever, and he won, because so it takes courage. And so one time I was really kind of angry at something that was happening politically, and we do take political stances, and I'm okay with that. Although I felt like I handled it wrong. It was more of like a poke in the eye to good people on the other side of the issue. And so I felt bad about that. I wish I could have backtracked that. I didn't mind taking the stand, but we put it on Facebook and we actually said we're donating money to this cause. So the people who had opposing views were kind of being given an ultimatum to not, when you shop with us, you're supporting what you oppose. And I thought that was a little unkind.
I think that's something that a lot of brands are struggling with right now. How do you keep you have so many issues. Where can you take a stand when it's part of your culture? But then how your company culture then transcends to the culture of your customers, and is it always the same thing? So that's a really interesting example.
Yeah, I mean, we're not all things to all people, and we're happy to take staunch political or activist stances. We're an activist company, and I'm an activist CEO. And there are people who I'm sure won't shop with us because of that. But I don't want to do it in a way, like I said, that kind of pokes them in the eye. I want to stand for what I believe in, and that means being against some things. But I don't want to taunt people and do that sort of thing.
So, I mean, it sounds like the company culture really is reflective of your own attitudes and beliefs.
Yeah, they are. And I think that's appropriate. I'm the founder. You take, let's take John Mackey from Whole Foods. I mean, he's gotten himself in hot water, but he's done the opposite. He has said things that do not speak to his typical customer's worldview, like he's challenged the legitimacy of climate change. And then he called Obamacare, he likened it to fascism. So he's done, but you have other companies like Hobby Lobby, Chick-fil-A, they do their own thing for their groups, and they're smart to do it. And it's a win-win because you get to feel like you're making the world a better place. You're being an activist, and you're actually speaking to your customers as well.
And because of that, you're not all things to all people. You are what you are, and again, customers can either take it or leave it.
That's right.
But I've got to imagine that if you had a whole bunch of investors, or if someone did due diligence to try to acquire you, that may not sit so well.
Well, I've met with plenty of these people, and I tell them straight up, I would never give up power. I own the company 100% right now, but kind of for that reason, I would not. That's a main reason. I would have to be so on board with them and trust them to let us do what we do, convincing them, by the way. And a lot of corporations and CEOs are incredibly short-sighted about this, that it's a win-win. I have a whole presentation about how running a socially responsible activist corporation is actually good for business, your bottom line. So I feel like I could have a partner and we could be on the same page with that.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. We've actually featured several social entrepreneurs this season on Bootstrapped. We had Pam Rothenberg and Chris Finley talking about Shelters to Shutters, and then we had Melissa Bradley talking about Project 500 a couple episodes ago. Do you consider yourself a social entrepreneur, and what does that mean to you?
I absolutely do. I could be and so it means to me, I this morning was speaking to some new employees, and I said, some people think being bigger is bad, big is bad. And that's the default of people, I think, and consumers. My belief is bad and good is good. And if you're good, I hope you're really big, And so I feel like that's the way Moms is we're making the world a better place. The bigger we are, the better we can make it. And the greatest companies on this planet, in my opinion, are founded by progressively activist CEOs. Whether it's Google or Amazon or Tesla or Starbucks or Costco or Chipotle, like they've disrupted entire industries. Apple, all these guys were progressively minded. I guess Apple wasn't too activist, but it's definitely a win-win. You can even look at Facebook, and he's an activist CEO. He's misstepped, and he deserves some blame right now. But it's not like it's Enron and Exxon and, General Motors. Like the disruptors are the activist progressives.
So remind us, our audience again, how many stores do you have now?
You have 18.
18 stores?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, congratulations.
Thanks.
That's no small feat. What's next?
We just got off a strategic offsite last week, and we're gonna double our stores by 2025. Not too aggressive. I'm kind of a cautious. I don't believe in growth for growth's sake. That's for sure. And we want to test a couple models or a model, and we want to go up into the Northeast, as far north as Boston.
So when we kicked off the show, I mentioned that you are also the owner of Vuk, which is a pinball and pizza place in Bethesda, and you also mentioned that your College Park location is moving and will now have room for 30 pinball machines.
Yeah.
Talk to us about the intersection of pinball and organics in your life.
Well,
I did not prepare that question beforehand. It just came to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm so passionate about pinball. The people I hang out with in the pinball leagues and tournaments are awesome. And to me, it's a meditative hobby. It's 3D. It's you can compete against yourself. I just love it. I can sit here and talk for a long time about pinball.
We'll have you back.
Yeah. But it's funny, like the tribe I was talking about.
Yeah.
Like the pinball people are a tribe. And there's a lot of overlap. Like we're all going to the Slayer concert together. We're into like this sci-fi weird stuff. So, so with the pinball going into the College Park store, that's just. I need a place to. I need a place to store my pinball games.
I know that we're on video now, but most of you are listening to the audio. Like I can't. The smile on Scott's face talking about pinball, I just have to capture.
Just for our audience again, what's your connections again? I think you have several connections to the University of Maryland.
Yeah. Well, my father was a professor there in business. He died suddenly in '82, but. I grew up, from my report card, I got, an autographed picture of John Lucas. I have to this day a signed note from Lefty Drizel to my dad, because my dad wrote an op-ed in the Diamondback, which was titled "Don't Dump Lefty." And so I grew up in Boutsville. So that the university has been my life, my childhood. So I do know Rudy Lamone. Some of those guys, I think all of them have retired. They ran with my dad.
That's great. Thank you very much. And how much time do you spend kind of counseling or advising other entrepreneurs?
Well, not much. Some do reach out to me. I just made an investment in a company, a friend of mine. I'm not much of a mentor, I don't think. Mainly because I don't have the time too much, but I do. I'm speaking at the university, I think Thursday actually this week, just to give a presentation on entrepreneurialism. So I do feel like entrepreneurs are kind of loners. Like I didn't know I was an entrepreneur. I just knew I was really disgruntled, and that's why I say it kind of saved me, it rescued me. And so I think a lot of people might be, not knowing what they want to do, again, not thinking they can do it better than their bosses or other people, and they just feel this restlessness. And so I like to speak to the kids in particular to let them know that they're not alone, and they might.
And what advice do you have for them?
Well, I think advice. I think. Kind of that I think entrepreneurialism is a symptom of a personality. I don't think entrepreneurs are smarter. I just think that we don't like authority, and we challenge conventional wisdom, and we like to help people. It kind of comes down to that, I feel like, and it's funny because I will say this too about entrepreneurs, and I think this is what prevents a lot of people from starting their own gig, is that they think entrepreneurs are really like risky, crazy people. And we're not. Like, we lie awake in bed analyzing every risk from every direction. But here's the difference, is we're willing to bluff the pot. So I think some people are afraid to risk a big amount, whereas we risk it all probably every 3 years,
right?
You know, and there's a lot of people who aren't willing to risk it all. But I contend that entrepreneurs do not take reckless risks, and that the odds are in our favor. I love the off topic, maybe a little bit, is the Arianna Huffington quote I heard in the warm up.
Oh, in the open, yeah.
Yeah, like assume life is stacked in your favor. You know,
a great
like
quote.
I love that.
So just to wrap up the show, you gave some general advice to entrepreneurs, but we have a number of entrepreneurs, particularly in our Fearless Founders program, that are trying to bring organic products to market. So for them, what specific advice would you give them as they're testing their products?
Yeah. Well, I think that they have to test the products. You know what I mean?
I guess, how would you suggest they do that? Yeah.
Because a lot of people think that what they have is great,
Yes.
and it's not maybe got to be great. And but they need to. The brand is important. So read some books on branding, especially with manufactured packaged products, because a lot of it is just like Ben & Jerry's ice cream. You know, like the brand behind that is so strong. Honest Tea, same thing. Yet I don't think they're incredibly innovative. I mean, they're slightly innovative, but they're not like a new product. So I would. That's all I can speak of to that. In that I don't know much about manufacturing, that kind of. I'm a retailer.
And so as we wrap up this episode, I do just want to point out that at the beginning you mentioned how you didn't read much as a student, but yet you mentioned reading in books about 5 or 6 times. So that's great.
That's
So
true.
people do change a lot over time. So Scott, thank you so much. This has been such a great episode. It's been so much fun having you in studio.
Delightful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Well, that was so much fun having Scott in studio. I think sometimes this was a case where we know the brand moms, but I really didn't know that much about Scott, and really didn't expect him to be quite the character and activist CEO that he is. I didn't know that about him.
It was fantastic to meet and hear his story and the mom story. And I know that we kind of have some of the younger people in our network, Alana, right, who've got these hockey stick growth companies. But to just see the kind of slow and steady progress, and I think for some of our listeners, right, they know about the mom's brand and name, and maybe they've got a location that's nearest them. But again, when you get 2x every year, all of a sudden now it's going to get on the radar screen. It sounds like all up and down the East Coast.
And he said, I loved a lot of the quotes that he had. The one I took away was, which I think all of us should think about, is it's not who you know, but it's who you know who likes you. I mean, that's, we're in education and particularly in what we do, we're in a relationship-based market. And we talk a lot about how, especially to our students, life is a marathon, and you don't know when people are going to show up again. So I really liked how he put that. I really also liked his quote, or I don't know if he was quoting someone else, but about being, having courage to have a culture. And I think that was really unique to think about as well.
That was huge. And the fact that he's so thoughtful about the culture that he's created, and he's willing to go ahead and stick by that culture and tell both employees and customers is we're not trying to be all things to all people. You and I both teach kind of, in entrepreneurship, listen to your customers. To have that courage also means sometimes customers saying, stop carrying this product, don't open this store, change your practice, and be able to say, that's not who we are. We're not going to do that.
I also think it's interesting that he referred to the tribe, and I've actually listened to Seth Godin and what he talks about a tribe, and I think it's important to understand what it's clear that he is a very different tribe than the tribe that shops at Whole Foods. And I thought that was interesting, since at face value you might think that they're the same. And my takeaway, and I think that the takeaway for entrepreneurs out there should be that when you do that customer empathy mapping or understand your demographics, understanding that tribe is so important because you might find that your competitor is not your competitor after all, or your competitor isn't quite the competitor, after all, because you can actually go after a very different tribe, even though the product might seem the same.
Yeah, I think there's customers who shop both at Mom's and at Whole Foods. And I think he kind of said it, Scott said it best when he didn't talk about competitors. He just said that they're, proximate, or they're kind of
co-located. He said we're kind of in the shadow or something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and the idea is, I guess, the bigger that Whole Foods is going to get, or maybe the more generic it's going to get, the more kind of diffused it gets, then that in some ways allows him to be maybe in a bigger shadow, but then also be bigger himself.
And that they've actually increased, rising tide lifts all boats. I think that's an example of what Whole Foods has done for the industry of organic products, has helped raise the visibility of a store like Mom's.
And could he be more humble?
No, I mean, yeah, he was, I think, even about from the growth of the store to the brand to even, the visibility of the culture as well. I think he was quite humble.
It was great. Just a great conversation. And I think a lot of great takeaways for our audience.
Well, thank you for tuning in to another great episode of Bootstrapped, a Dingman Center podcast. I'm Ilana Fine. You can follow me on Twitter at Ilana Fine or at UMD_Dingman.
And I'm Joe Bailey. You can follow me on Twitter at Joseph P. Bailey. Thanks to all of our loyal listeners who download our episodes and subscribe to our podcast. And until next time, we encourage all of our listeners to bootstrap your next venture.
Bootstrapped would like to thank its cast. Bootstrapped hosts Ilana Fine and Joe Bailey. Bootstrapped executive producer Oscar Santana. And associate director of the Dingman Center, Holly DeArmond. Remember to subscribe to our show on iTunes and leave a 5-star review.